observation. I've created 3 different objects here, S1, S2, and S3. Okay. We take the input from the user, roll number, name, and class teacher name, roll number, name, and class teacher name. Again, for each and every student, like say in your class, 72 students are there. For all 72 students, we are collecting this data. Okay. So what are your observations on this data?
The variable class teacher has same value.
The variable class teacher is repeated over here,
Has
right?
same.
Same
Yes.
name is repeated, same data we store. See here, roll number is different, so it's okay to store it separately. Roll number हर एक का अलग होगा, नाम हर एक का अलग होगा, right? Everyone is having unique name, roll number, and everything like all the other data. But what about class teacher? For all the students of one class, one division, the class teacher name would remain same, right? It would remain same. So is it a good idea to allocate separate memory for all these, just to store the same data? We are allocating separate memory each time. 20 memory locations will be reserved here because size we have kept as character 20. So that much space we are wasting for all the objects separately. Whereas data is common, we can have a common variable here. Why to waste that memory for that variable, right? Because the value remains same for everyone. Here also we store roll number and name, but roll number name हर एक का अलग होगा, whereas class teacher would remain same. Agree with me, everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So now in this case, for such situations, what we can do, instead of creating this variable at object level, मतलब हर एक object के लिए अलग से क्यों create करना है? This particular variable can be created only once because it is applicable to all the objects of student class. Common value is there for all the objects of student class. So for these type of variable, there is no I mean, it's not a good idea to allocate separate memory, है ना, हर एक object के लिए. So what I'll do is I'll remove this information from each object. See, from everywhere we'll remove this memory space because this is unnecessary. We are repeating the same data and we are wasting the memory. So instead of that, what we can do is we can keep it separately. अलग ही रख देते हैं उसको. We'll keep it separate. Okay. But now if we keep it separate, we want to allocate it with this student class. मतलब student class का ये part है. It is not a separate thing as such. It is related to students only. Students, those who are belonging or those who are part of one particular division. So this class teacher is related to that student class only. ये independent नहीं है variable. We don't want to define it separately as such. It should be a part of this class only, but it should not be created for each object separately. Class का ही part होना चाहिए. So for that, what we'll do, we'll not allocate it with one particular object. Instead, we create it for that student class. पूरे class के लिए we'll keep it. For the entire class, one common variable will create, and its scope should be the entire class, student class, and not one particular student. So instead of creating that space separately here, we'll save that space and we'll create this object separately, right? Yes. So this object, this particular variable is created separately. And what is the scope of this variable? This entire class मतलब जब भी आप इसके object create करोगे, for all the object, Rahul Pitade sir would be a class teacher. Common data is applicable for all the objects of student class. This is nothing but class scope. ये पूरे class के लिए एक common variable we have created. Is it clear? Yes, the variables which are created at object scope. For each object we are creating these variables separately. So ये इनका scope क्या हो गया? Object. Okay. Whereas this particular variable we are creating for a class, entire class. one single variable. We are not repeating this variable for each and every object. This variable will be created only once. Okay, space will be allocated only once. Okay, so these type of variables are called as static variables. Static variable, wherein the scope of that variable is the entire class and not one particular object. Object wise uski value change nahi hogi. It is for the entire class. Are you getting the concept? You should first understand the concept of static. Static kyun chahiye? Yes, is it clear? With example, it is always easy to understand. Right? ये questions आपको see, these are very important topics, huh? Like macros, inline function, static data, static functions. These are very important topics. Frequently questions are asked in your technical interviews also on all this topic. Concept wise, you need to understand it. You should be able, the way I am explaining it to you, you should be able to explain it that concept wise. Syntax as such is very simple. Like yesterday also we have seen, just by adding inline keyword you can make that function inline. Matlab khatam ho gaya? No, you should understand the concept. Why is it required? So here also you should understand the concept. Ye kaise karna hai, what is the syntax and all that, that we'll discuss, no doubt. I'll tell you the syntax. Okay, that is very simple to understand syntax. But why is it required? So I hope with this example everything is clear to you all. And if you have any doubt, please let me know. Now only you can ask the questions. Whatever thing we have covered on this example, if you have any doubt, please let me know. How to make it static, I will tell you the syntax. Syntax related hai, to we are going to cover it now only. But concept wise, if any doubt is there. Anything. No? Okay. So this is the concept of static variable, wherein we are creating some variable for the entire class in common. In common, we are creating it. Okay. It is not specific to any particular object. It is applicable to all the objects. Okay. One more important thing about this class scope variable or static variable, like say for example, for first year, see initially when we plan the academics, okay, so while planning only we decide who will be the class teacher for first year, A division, B division, C division, and so on. For all the division we plan it in the beginning only, for second year also and all that. But sometimes what happen, that admissions happen after that. Admissions we haven't started yet, but still we have planned who will be the class teacher for first year, A division, B division, and so on. So my question is, like, if we haven't yet got any admission, अब तक हमारे first year के admission नहीं हुए, but still we have decided the class teacher because we have to plan it in the beginning. सब academics हमें पहले ही plan करना होता है. So in that case, if student admissions are not there, can I create the object of the student class? अगर मेरे पास admission ही नहीं है, मेरे पास वो roll number है ही नहीं देने के लिए. If students are not there, so do we create the objects? यहाँ पे object create होगा? नहीं होगा. नहीं होगा, right? When I start getting the admission one by one, I will start creating the object and adding the data in that. But still, if we don't have any object, but still that class teacher exists for that class. Class teacher to hoga, that we have planned in the beginning only. Are you getting the point?
Yes, ma'am.
हाँ, so class teacher exists in the beginning only. We want to allocate some name to that class teacher variable, but yet we haven't created any object of it. But still that class teacher name exists. Okay, we have planned it. So in such situation also, this static variables are used. मतलब पहले से आपने वो डाल के रखा है because its scope is class. You can initialize anything at class level. Okay, we need not create any object even to allocate this particular data to that static variable. Okay, so at the beginning, even if that object is not there, we can allocate its class teacher name also. Okay, so this is about static variable. Static matlab it it its scope is for the entire class irrespective of the number of object that you create. You may create object, you may not create object, but it will exist. Are you getting the point?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, so this is about the concept of static variables. Now let us see the theory or discuss all these PPTs related to static data member. So static data member is, it will be created only once. As I told you, it won't be created for each and every object separately. It will be created only once. All objects should share it. So all objects are going to share the same data. Okay. It is a class variable. As I told you, what is the scope of this variable? क्लास. मैंने यहाँ पे क्या लिखा है? क्लास का नाम. और यहाँ पे क्या लिखा है मैंने? ऑब्जेक्ट का नाम हर एक जगह पे. So these are, all these variables are object. The scope of all these variable is object, whereas the scope of this is class. Yes. So it is a class variable. Automatically initialized to 0 when first object is created. हाँ, initialization if you want, it is automatically initialized. अगर आप भूल गए, if you don't put anything into that, if you by mistake or maybe you forget or you didn't add any value, automatically it takes 0 value. Okay. Use of static member. Static variable may be a pointer to an error handling routine for that class. मतलब वो क्लास में कुछ like runtime if any error happens, so if you are writing any error handling routine, so for that also you can use it. It may be used to keep a track of how many objects of that class are created, right? Suppose यहाँ पे मैंने एक counter, हाँ, how many objects of that class is created. So suppose here to count the number of object, अगर मैंने यहाँ पे एक काउंटर वेरिएबल लिया तो S1 के लिए वो इनिशियलाइज हो गया 0. S2 में भी मैंने वेरिएबल लेके रखा है CNT, अगेन इट इज इनिशियलाइज टू 0. So instead I will not be able to keep the track of how many objects of that particular class is created if I keep it inside the object, क्योंकि हर एक ऑब्जेक्ट में वो अलग से 0 इनिशियलाइज होता रहेगा and it will be created separately, right? So instead of that, what I can do, instead of having count variable here, how many objects of this class are created, so what I can do, I can have that count variable in the class scope. I can initialize it to 0, and each time whenever you create a new object, I'll increment its value by 1. ये काउंटर की वैल्यू में हर बार 1 से इंक्रीमेंट कर सकती हूँ. Whenever that object is created for that class, I can increment its count by 1. So at the end, I will be able to know how many objects of this class are created. अगर ये common variable होगा मेरा, like for the entire class, if common variable is there, then only I will be able to keep track of that count, कि how many objects of that class are created. Are you getting? So this is also one use of static variable, to count how many objects of that class are created. So where can you increment this count? ये कहाँ पे इंक्रीमेंट कर सकते हो आप? बोलो. You have learned that concept. You can tell me this answer. To count number of objects created for one particular class, we can have a common count variable. Okay, common count variable मतलब इसे हम static बना देंगे. Okay, but static बनाने के बाद each time new object is created, I need to increment its value by 1. नया object जब भी आपका बनेगा, it should be incremented by 1, right? So where to increment its value? यहाँ पे हमने create कर दिया as a static, so that is just a creation of it. But each time it should be incremented by 1. After creating one object of, I mean, whenever new object is created, it should be incremented by 1. And it is
Constructor.
Yes, constructor. Perfect. When you come to know about new object of any class is created, whenever you create any new object for any class, it calls the constructor. अगर आपने कुछ पैरामीटर नहीं दिया तो in that case it will call the default constructor. पैरामीटर है तो parameterized constructor. But each time whenever object is created, it will call the constructor. Are you getting? So in constructor, you need to write here constructor. Okay, that for student you need to write the constructor, and in that constructor you can say count plus plus, or count is equal to count plus 1. So each time you can increment this count variable, but the scope of this count variable is not specific to one particular object. ये भी आप ध्यान रखो. It is common to all the object. सभी ऑब्जेक्ट में वो एक्सेसिबल चाहिए आपको काउंट. Okay, and it should be, the count should be maintained at one place only. ऐसे नहीं कि हर एक जगह पे आप काउंट क्रिएट करोगे, यहाँ पे एक काउंट, यहाँ पे. जब भी आप काउंट करते हो, say for example, if I want to count number of student in your class, तो हर एक स्टूडेंट के पास एक काउंट वेरिएबल रखना जरूरी नहीं है. We'll keep that count variable only once in the memory. एक ही बार एक ही वेरिएबल होगा, उसमें आप बस इंक्रीमेंट करते रहोगे उसकी वैल्यू. Each time new variable is created, you increment it by 1. Next हो गया तो 2 कर दो, 3 कर दो, likewise. Okay, so its copy is kept only once, and each time its value will be incremented. Are you getting the difference here?
Yes.
Are you getting? Yes. मतलब यहाँ पे भी है कि यहाँ पे कैसा है कि रोल नंबर शुड ऑलवेज बी, फॉर दिस S1 स्टूडेंट रोल नंबर शुड ऑलवेज बी 1 एंड नेम शुड ऑलवेज बी दिस. फॉर S2 इट रोल नंबर इज 2 एंड नेम इज दिस. बट वेयर एज काउंट जो आपका वेरिएबल है, काउंट वेरिएबल शुड होल्ड ओनली वन सिंगल वैल्यू एट द एंड. सबसे एंड में मुझे एक ही वैल्यू चाहिए उसके लिए, हर एक के लिए. यहाँ पे कैसे रोल नंबर की यहाँ पे 3 वैल्यू है, यहाँ पे 2 वैल्यू है, यहाँ पे 1 वैल्यू है, बट काउंट के लिए हम अलग अलग वैल्यू नहीं रख सकते. दिस इज अ कॉमन काउंट. मैंने अगर आपको बोला है कि आपके पास कितने नोटबुक्स है, यू कैलकुलेट द नोटबुक्स. ओके, सो दैट इज वन सिंगल काउंट, राइट. So for this counting of number of objects, we can have a static variable. So that is also one use of static data member. Okay, how many objects of that class are created? This is a graphical representation. Whatever I've explained to you here only, same thing is represented. Okay, for each object separate memory space is allocated. Say per object, suppose this number variable I have created, so numbers, different values we can keep. Okay, but count is what? Count is a static variable. Matlab all the objects will refer the same copy of the count. Okay, so this is the graphical representation of static variable, how they are created. Only single copy of the static variable is created for all the object, and all the object can share it, they can access it. And this is about syntax. Syntax is very simple. Just whatever class you declare, same declaration is required here. Just by adding static keyword in front of that variable, will treat this variable as a static variable. उसके आगे just आपको static keyword add करना है, right? Okay, and one more important thing you need to do is, whenever you create any static variable, it should be declared again after completion of that class. It has to be declared again integer I, but here you need to mention the scope also. The scope of this I is what? C. Okay, so you have to declare it again outside the class, just to make that compiler this is required for the initialization purpose. Actually, here you have to initialize the variable. Whatever static variables are there, you need to initialize them. If you don't initialize them, then in that case it will consider 0 as the default value. Matlab initialization is compulsory for static variable. If you don't initialize it, it will consider 0 by default. Okay, so whenever you make any variable as static matlab common for the entire class. So in that case, just add the keyword static. And second important thing is you need to initialize it. यहाँ पे initialize करना है आपको. Initialize कैसे करते हैं? How do you initialize the variables? Here you need to put some value, right? Initialization matlab putting some value in that. So you need to initialize. Ideally, I should give some value. That is called as initialization. So this part is compulsory for static variable. So two things you need to do. Static you need to add and you need to initialize it. और अगर आपने इनिशियल वैल्यू नहीं दिया, लाइक यू फॉरगेट टू पुट और यू डोंट वांट टू इनिशियलाइज इट विद एनी अदर वैल्यू, ऑटोमेटिकली कंपाइलर विल कंसिडर 0. मतलब आपने इक्वल टू 0 नहीं किया या कोई और वैल्यू नहीं किया तो automatically compiler will consider that value as 0. Okay, but that part is compulsory for static variables. So these two things you need to do for static variable as far as syntax is concerned. Clear? Okay, and then how to access static variable. So two ways are there to access static variable inside main. One method is you are familiar with, simply create the object and say object.i. जैसे आप नॉर्मल वेरिएबल को एक्सेस करते हो, सिमिलरली यू कैन एक्सेस द स्टैटिक वेरिएबल यूजिंग ऑब्जेक्ट डॉट दैट वेरिएबल नेम. This is simple method which you are familiar with. One more way is there to access the static variable, C:(i). Scope resolution, sorry, it's not a colon, C scope resolution I. This is allowed because the scope of this static variable is class and not a particular object. एक पर्टिकुलर ऑब्जेक्ट के लिए नहीं क्रिएट होता है ये, इट इज क्रिएटेड फॉर द एंटायर क्लास. सो दिस इज आल्सो अलाउड फॉर स्टैटिक. एज आई टोल्ड यू इनिशियली, इफ admissions are not there but still we have created the we have defined the class teacher for first year, so in that case without creating object also you can do this. यहाँ पे मैंने ऑब्जेक्ट नहीं क्रिएट किया, डायरेक्टली ऑन क्लास आई एम डूइंग दिस. यू कैन हैव सीन आल्सो हियर, सीन सी scope resolution I. You can take the input, you can display this value, anything can be done on this static variable. जैसे आप normal variable को handle करते हो, similar way you can handle the static variable. If you are happy with this syntax, go with this. If you are happy with object वाला syntax, go with that. Okay, any of this way can be used to access those variable. लेकिन अभी sometimes what happen, before creating object only we want to give some value, we want to take some value from the user for that static variable. In that case you can access it on the class name directly. यहाँ पे मैंने class name, see this is C is a class name, so class name, scope resolution and that variable. So directly you can access it on class also. So that flexibility is available with static.